have my wonderful guest, Shelly Abramowitz. That's a hard one. I'll get the hang of it. So I know Shelly because he's my dear friend's husband. And I was just fascinated by all the incredible stories that Shelly had every time we were at the dinner table. And I would just stay like this for like 2 hours. Like, okay, what else? Like, how many lives has Shelly lived? Because I feel like every time we sat down, I would just hear another one and another one and another one. And I thought I got it all, like at the first sitting. And then the second sitting, I'm like, wait, and that too, and that too, and that too. So I love entrepreneurship. And I'd like to consider myself an entrepreneur too. And my goal is always like, when I grow up, I wanted to be a serial entrepreneur. You know, I wanted to start businesses and sell them and open and sell and just do that process of creating, partially because I love, like, okay, my first reason is because I love creating. And then I want to sell it because then if I'm in it too long, I get bored. So if I like make it and sell it, I don't have to do all that work to keep it alive. And then the other part is that I like to make the money. So I would love to just like get the money and make something else, get the money and make something else, you know? But anyways, so I saw that you've done a lot of different businesses and been part of a series of industries. And I was like, okay, cool. I want to ask you all the questions that people like me might be, you know, wishing they had someone like you to ask these questions to, and get like your words of wisdom. And also because I also really admired like the way that you were so open about talking, because sometimes I feel like, especially in Miami, sometimes people don't share so much. You know, people are very quiet about how they make their money or like how they, you know, go about their business and then for someone like me, or other aspiring entrepreneurs that, you know, want to be successful in life, that didn't grow up with money, that didn't have someone that mentored them, where do they get that information from, you know? So I feel like you're the right guy to like ask and get all this wisdom from. So thanks for being part of my podcast.
It's my pleasure. It's nice to be here. And I thought about when you asked me if I would mind being interviewed, and I thought about it, and it brought me back to, like, I think I told you the story when I was operating in New York, a big restaurant, and we were all masters of the universe. And they asked me, somebody came to me and they said, would you mind coming to one of my classes and telling the students about what you do, or how you did this, or how you did anything? Because, you know, they knew me from some of my previous businesses. And I said, I'd love to. And I didn't know who he was, but he was a professor at the New School. And I thought I was going, and I was going to be there for, you know, class, 30 kids in a classroom. And they walked me over, and I got to the school, and they take me inside, and they walk me into this auditorium. And there's hundreds of kids. And I said, boy, you got me and wrote me into this, huh? And he smiled, and he says, they all want to hear. And I started like this, and it went on for an hour and a half, and then 50 kids stayed afterwards. And I was so moved by the experience because it was exciting for them, and you could see it in their eyes. And they were just excited to be able to, you know, ask the questions and get somebody who'd been through it. And they, you know, they didn't have any direction, and they wanted some. So everybody's looking for something. But I made some notes. Go for it. And I thought about like how I started. And the first thing that I thought of when I think about working was it was 1967. I was 11.
You started working at 11?
At 11. And it was, the only reason I didn't start at 10 is you couldn't deliver newspapers in my neighborhood at 10. You had to be 11.
Wow.
I got the route, and then I said, how can I make more money doing this? So I hired 2 10-year-olds to deliver the papers, and I took 2 routes. And they pay you a few cents for each paper. So I kept the few cents for each paper, and I let the kids keep the tips. So there I was running 2 routes. I'd pick up the papers, and the guy couldn't figure out how I could deliver so many papers. And I didn't tell him what I was doing, but I was letting kids who couldn't deliver newspapers because they weren't old enough. And it was kind of brilliant because here I was making like 20, $30 a week. I was 11 and it was a long time ago and it was a lot of money for me and I wasn't doing any work and it was great.
That sounds like a plan.
It was a plan and it was my first plan. And, years later, I reflected back on it because I always wanted things. And my dad made a deal with me back then. He said, if you get a job and you work hard, I'll split it with you. And, I'd want some skis when I was skiing. I wanted a stereo when it was music. I wanted a car. So when I bought a car, he split it with me, when I went off to college and had to have some wheels. So we split it and it went on like that. And it motivated me to get out and do something and work. Those were all interesting jobs as a kid. I ran a Baskin Robbins. I did all sorts of things. I ran a ski shop, and I ran the ski shop mounting ski bindings back in those days so that I could ski for free, because on the weekends we'd fill buses up with kids. So I'd fill the buses up with my friends, get 2 free seats, go with my girlfriend, and off we'd go skiing every weekend. And it was great. Then I went to college. I went to university in Boston, and I got out of school and I had no idea what to do. I finished college. I was 19 years old. In New York, they let you skip grades. So I skipped a couple of grades.
Like voluntarily?
Yeah, well, there's programs in New York where you could go 7th, 8th, and 9th is middle school. Mm-hmm. And they let you do it in 2 years. So you skip 8th.
Oh, okay.
So I did that. And then in the summers, I took classes and I skipped another half a year in high school. So I finished high school at 16.
Wow.
And I graduated in January. I turned 17 that March, and I was already in college at Boston University.
Wow.
So I stayed summers in Boston because I didn't want to go home either, because I was 16, 17, 18 years old. Mm-hmm. And it was more fun than anything you could possibly imagine. As a young guy in Boston back in the 70s, it was great. Boston's a great town because 500,000 kids go to school there.
Yeah.
So it was no problem finding something to do. And it was all good. And then I graduated at 19 from college. So I'm 19 years old and I didn't know what to do. And my girlfriend had gone off to Paris. And the summer before, I worked for TWA as a flight attendant while I was in school. I took her for an interview and I got hired because I taught the guy how to play backgammon in the interview. And he said, you don't have to go through the rest of the interviews. You got the job. So I started in New York and I flew out of JFK in LaGuardia. And you start off with one route, but in another week, another 100 people graduated. So I was already senior to 100 people. In 2 weeks, I was senior to 200 people. Now, the seniority is important because once you get senior enough in the airlines, you could pick your line of time and pick your route. So I did Vegas flights, 24-hour layover in Vegas. I'd go back and forth to Los Angeles 8 times a month, San Francisco another month. And I spent 5 months flying all over the country. But back then, there were no computers. And you had an ID card and you had your uniform and your wings. And just like the movie, we would just walk up to the counter and we can fly anywhere we wanted. So after I had quit the airlines, I kept all those things and I got my ID card with a new sticker from my friends. And I'd go to the counter and I'd get a ticket and I'd off the next morning. I'm in Paris visiting my girlfriend because I didn't know what to do with myself after college. So off I went to Paris. And I'm in Paris and the phone rings. I was there for about a weekend and I ran off to Rome because I wanted to see the Vatican and I wanted to see the Sistine Chapel. I had studied Michelangelo and I wanted to see the ceiling. But it was Christmas and there was nowhere to go. And a lady grabbed me in an alleyway when I was right outside the Vatican. And she took me into the kitchen. I didn't speak a word of Italian at the time, but she was babbling away and she had her apron on and she saw that I was lost. And she took me in her kitchen. She sat me down. She fed me some pasta. She made a gnocchi, which I'd never eaten before, and it was homemade.
Those
it was
are
delicious.
So
good. And then she spoke to me in Italian, and I knew she was asking me because she pointed at the map and she said, "Where do you want to go?" And I pointed at the Sistine Chapel and the Vatican and the whole thing. And she pointed me in that direction, gave me a big kiss, and off I went. And I looked around and there was nobody there. But I said to myself, that was unbelievable. I said, nobody's ever done that for me. I'm coming back to Europe always. This is just wonderful.
Yeah.
It's not like that in New York City.
Mm-mm.
And that was life's experiences of just, being in a new country and in a new place, and it was adventure. But the phone rang one morning when I was in Paris in my girlfriend's apartment, and some friends in Boston said, Shelly, we just spoke with a guy and we met with him and we went to a meeting and it's a perfect job for you. And I said, what's that? And he says, you have to come home and we'll set you all up. So I left about 2 weeks later. I went back to Boston and I met with these people. And it was a peddling business. These guys were filling warehouses with cutlery and glasses and pots and pans. And they'd fill the cars up with all this merchandise, and you'd drive around and you'd go into a store and you'd tell people that you just had a show and you have all these samples left over, and you'd sell them. And you get pretty good at it.
Is that like that brand's called Carico?
I don't know. I don't know
It's like
what
a
it
knife.
is today.
I remember them coming over
With
my
knives,
house in
with
the 80s
sets
with
of
the
knives.
set and selling it.
Exactly the same. Just like that.
Okay.
So I worked for these guys for about 30 days and I made a lot of money. And I'd empty out my car every day of merchandise. And I was like their top salesman. And then I said, you know something? I'm going to put on a suit and I'm going to put on a tie. And I went into New York and I went up to Libby Glass and Federated Glass. I went to the main offices and I looked at the largest, best glass set that I could find, which was like a 54-piece of lead crystal barware with a beautiful picture on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how much would it cost me to buy a whole container of these things? And the price was more reasonable than what I was paying with these guys. So I set up a warehouse in my neighborhood in Queens. And in about 6 months of doing that, I made a couple $100,000.
Sweet.
I was about 20 years old.
Who would you sell to?
People. And I ran the ads just the same way they did. And I hired 10 salesmen and I trained the salesmen each day and gave them the glasses and the knives and the cutlery and everything that I had acquired. And I sent everybody out and we made a lot of money. And
Nice.
I said, this is a lot of work. I don't want to do this anymore.
Mm.
So I said, let me do the same thing and I'll go down to 47th Street in New York, which is the Jewish Jewelry Exchange.
Yeah.
I say Jewish because I'm Jewish and that's everybody I knew had grown up, had a parent or a relative with a booth in the exchange. So I said, I could do the same thing and I could sell jewelry. I said, instead of selling $20 set of glasses, I could sell a $200 bracelet or $2,000 earrings or a Rolex or, just up the ante,
Mm-hmm.
And change from selling a $20 item to a more expensive item. And that's what I did with the $200,000. I went down to 47th Street and I filled a suitcase with jewelry. And then I'd run around all my friends from college that worked in the advertising agencies, that worked in the Garment Center, that worked in Wall Street. And I had those 3 markets predominantly. And then all over New York. And I met lots of interesting people. You can imagine going up through these office buildings.
Yeah.
With my little card, and I would say, I'm selling jewelry. Would you like to see it? And all the offices are full of women.
Did you have them in your jacket? Would you open your jacket?
Well,
and
I had them in a
hang?
suitcase on board, so I would just kind of whip it out and
That's
I
not
would
that
show
fun.
them.
That's not as fun as a jacket, though. You've seen that one?
It would have been more interesting if I did it in a jacket. But no, this was more secure because I had it in my little suitcase.
Yeah.
And it was a riot. But back then, gold was only like 100 and how much was it? Jeez, when I started, gold was like $75 an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I sold the business it was about 5 or 6 years later, gold was up at $650.
Oh my gosh.
So I was sitting there one day and I said, I'm getting tired of this, like what you were talking about. And I was selling little bracelets and rings and earrings, but I had $1 million worth of inventory. And I ran the numbers in my head and I said, let me just sell all the inventory and I'll make back my money 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of it 6 times. And I cashed out $1 million
Wow.
from the jewelry business. And that was the end of the jewelry business. And I had been renting a house in France from my travels in back in the days when I was visiting the girlfriend in Paris, I'd go through Paris, and we had a home in Saint-Tropez that I shared with a friend of mine for 10 summers.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had a great time vacationing in Europe every year, every summer. And I went out in Paris on that trip, and I went to a club in Paris. I was in my late 20s, and it was fabulous. It was a big government building, and it had this 80-foot screen. And I looked up on the screen, and there was the Rolling Stones performing in Amsterdam.
Wow.
And then the next 2 minutes later, it's Gloria Gaynor, Donna Summer. It was disco. So they were all performing in all these cities, in Antwerp, in Brussels, in Munich. And I said, this is fabulous. I got to go back home. There's nothing like this in New York. I'm going to find a theater with a big screen, and I'm going to duplicate this club.
Mm-hmm.
And I got back home, and this was back in the days of Studio 54. So it was like 78, 79, around then. And I made a deal with a lady who was running the Beacon Theater up on 75th and Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
Famous Beacon Theater. It's like 3,200 seats. She was running it as a cultural center, so she couldn't pay the bills.
Gotcha.
It was nonprofit, struggling. So I said, Kazuko Hillier, her name was. She was Japanese. I said, Kazuko, you can run all the cultural events you want, but I'm going to do for-profit events. I'm going to do concerts. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this work. So she shook my hand, and we made a deal. I subleased the theater. And 78, 79, and 80, I did 200 concerts.
So live performers or?
Live performers. We did shows like Dire Straits, B-52s, Talking Heads. I had a meeting with John Lennon and Yoko in their apartment. They were going to start the thing called the Imagine Tour.
Wow.
Yeah, big wow.
So how did you get in touch with these artists?
It was a network. When you're in the music business, everybody, talks a lot, and things come to you when you have a theater. I had the most magnificent theater in New York City for the medium-sized act. We were the first ones to do the fight simulcast, the famous No Mas fight.
Okay.
Which that was Roberto Duran, right? And then the Leonard fight on simulcast, which was great money because you had 3,200 seats, and back then we were selling the seats for about $30.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of money. It was like $100,000 a night just simulcasting a fight in a theater. It was the beginning of that.
Wow.
I mean, then it got bigger and larger, and now they do it in stadiums.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we started that. See, this was all before MTV and all of those video
Oh, really?
networks.
When did MTV start then?
A few years later, just started.
Okay.
And my biggest problem was content because it wasn't legal to do video broadcasting. So all the videos I was seeing in Europe were bootlegs.
Gotcha.
So in America, it's all regulated, and I didn't think it through. So I didn't have enough content to do the club idea. But we made it through a few years of doing business because we were producing all these great shows. I mean, Bob Marley, he was booked for 11 nights and he died. Wow. I had to give the money back. That was $1 million. It was 11 nights sold out. John Lennon, he got shot right in the middle of the conversation, like weeks later. He was going to start the Imagine Tour probably a month later. So my lawyer told me to get the hell out of the business. I was killing people.
You're bad luck.
Wasn't funny. Wasn't funny, but that ended not well because the city came in and wanted me to completely fix the theater, which was 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And well, actually, it wasn't 100 years. It was from the 20s. It was like 1923. And this was in the 70s. So at that time, it was about 50 years old. But it was run down and it was leaking and the pipes were broken. And we couldn't afford it. It was like a $3 million fix.
But you were subleasing from the Japanese lady.
We were subleasing. So that was a fight and a struggle with the city.
Yeah.
See, once I became profitable, they left her alone because she was non-for-profit.
They went after you.
Yeah, and they went after us. But that was interesting. It was a lesson on why you shouldn't be in the music business. But my last year in Saint Tropez was in 1981. And I ran into a friend of mine who wanted to get out of Saint Tropez. He wasn't having any fun. So I got him a ticket. And he said, meet me in New York when you get home. You know everybody. He said, you'd be a great partner in a new project that I'm working on. And I met him at his deli on 57th Street. He owned the Stage Deli. And I said, long as I get a free corned beef sandwich. So he gave me a corned beef sandwich. We loaded into his car and he drove me down to 19th and Park. And we stood on the corner and I said, this is a great spot. And he said, what are you talking about? It's an empty store. I said, no, forget the store. He said, this street is a very famous street. I said, when I was a kid growing up in Queens, we used to take the subway down here. This was the block of Max's Kansas City, which was a very famous club in New York.
Okay.
And I would hang out with David Bowie, Todd Rundgren,
Nice.
the New York Dolls, Lou Reed. All of these became friends of mine years later. And it was a magical moment because I was a young kid. I was like 15 or 16 years old then. We were sneaking in because we were all underage.
Yeah.
But we were rubbing shoulders with these people and listening to their music. It was great. And I said, this corner will be a great spot.
For a club?
For a restaurant.
Okay.
He wanted me to do a restaurant. So we designed a restaurant and built a restaurant. And it was the most popular restaurant in 1983.
What was it called?
It was called Canistell's.
Canistell's?
Canistell's in New York City.
Canistell's.
Very famous and very popular.
And what was your role there?
I was basically, orchestrating the crowd because I brought in all my friends from Studio 54 days. I'd have Andy Warhol there, and I had O.J. Simpson and his wife Nicole. We'd have dinner all the time. It went on and on and on. All sorts of interesting people and fun people from, New York was an exciting town in the 70s and the 80s. It was different than it is today.
So you were like the promoter of that time?
I was the promoter operator. We
know?
were partners, but then we had an argument and he said, I don't need you. I could do this by myself. So we ended up in court and I said, this is not working out. I walked away and we fought for a number of years over it. But I put together another group of people and signed a lease about 3 blocks away on 21st and Broadway. And I started designing another restaurant. I called it Cafe Society. And we raised almost $5 million from Wall Street people. And we built this beautiful restaurant, opened in 1987.
So what happened with the ex-partner?
He continued on. He ended up...
Did you walk away with nothing? Or?
No. He had a big success with Canistell's and he went on to own Tao, which opened in Las Vegas and the Venetian.
Nice,
and then he owned a number of clubs and he ended up selling his business for over $100 million.
But did you get...
No, I got nothing.
What?
I was cut out of that deal. I walked away from what what we had created as a big success. And then I was able to raise all that money because people recognized that I had put most of the energy into creating it.
Wow.
So they let me create another venue, and that was Cafe Society. And Cafe Society was a big hit, except 1987, the stock market crashed. So we got very creative and we did dancing, we did La Cage nights, we did big...
What is La Cage nights?
We had transvestites doing a review.
Okay.
The review was so successful in my restaurant. I mean, one guy was doing Bette Midler, another one was Barbara Streisand. They were fabulous.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was amazing.
So wait, a review is them performing
They performed
someone else's...
in the restaurant.
That's called a review?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, like a La Cage review and like the movie La Cage.
Okay. No, I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, these were all transsexuals that were performers and the best in the world. They ended up in Las Vegas and they're still there.
Wow.
They're still doing that show and they're still performing and it's obviously not the same guys, but it's transformed into a big act and a huge success. But we did things like that, and we survived. But an interesting thing happened. The landlord came to me and he said, I have a basement. And he proposed a dozen different ideas to me because I had control of the basement because of the egress. Because the restaurant was situated above all of the entrances and exits, he couldn't do anything down there without me.
Mm-hmm.
I had all the ins and outs so that nobody could get a permit without me. So when he said to me one day, a guy came in and wants to open up a billiard hall in the basement. And I said, that's an interesting idea. I played billiards in Queens, on Queens Boulevard, and I was pretty good at it. But I said, that would be a lot of fun. And there was one or two billiard halls that had opened already in the city, and you could see that it was coming. It became a huge craze in New York, and this was 88, 89.
Okay.
So we opened up Society Billiards in the basement. I did that with one of the partners in the restaurant. The two of us, actually there were three of us that were partners, and it was a huge success. We made the money back in 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. It was more successful than the restaurant.
So that was basically another business, not part of Cafe Society.
That's right, another business.
And then you were a partner in that one.
And a partner in that one.
But why were you a partner in that one?
Well, because it was my idea again.
Oh, gotcha.
And then I grabbed one of the investors in the restaurant, and he threw in a few dollars, and we all threw in, it was about $300,000, $100 each.
Mm-hmm.
And we made it back in 3 months.
Perfect.
I said, this is better than the restaurant business. There's only 2 employees.
Nice.
A guy at the desk and a guy cleaning the floor and cleaning the tables.
Yeah.
And you can't play on the table until you switch on the light, which was controlled by the computer. It's the perfect storm. Upstairs, I had 160 employees all stealing from me all at once.
Oh my God.
So this was much easier.
Wow.
Yeah. So I said, I'm going to go and open up these all over the country. So I went to Philadelphia with a friend of mine, David Brenner, who was a famous comedian at the time. And we almost did one there. We went up to Boston, and we should have done Boston. But then I said, I don't want to do these cold cities. I want to go someplace warm. So the next trip I went to Miami, and I came down to Miami. And
Not your first time.
No, I had been visiting my grandfather and I knew Miami, but I said, that would be a great place to open up. And I had been invited to Miami before by a guy named Tibor Hollow, who's a famous developer here in Miami.
Okay.
Panorama on Brickell.
Yeah.
That's Tibor.
Oh, wow.
The Grand.
Yeah.
That's Tibor.
Wow.
And the Grand was built that year that I met him. It was 87 when I had opened the restaurant. That's when he built the Grand. And it was the only building downtown. There was no other condos downtown. He built the first one. And he flew me down, and I'd seen the Grand. And I said, Tibor, this is great, but there's no community here.
Right.
I said, it's a destination. I said, I don't want that. If I'm going to open up, it's going to be on South Beach, which I did years later. I opened up a restaurant on Ocean Drive and later on Lincoln Road.
Wait, not the billiards?
Well, I did the billiards first.
Okay. In South Beach?
Tibor had invited me to do a restaurant. I rejected that idea because I didn't like the location. And I didn't have my arms wrapped around it because I was so busy in New York with my big restaurant. But the pool hall was simple. I took a space on Washington Avenue where Crunch Gym is. Upstairs.
That's where I go.
You go there?
I love that place.
Well, I put in the air conditioning. I did the bathrooms. The whole room is me.
No way.
Oh, yeah. So I built that whole space. That space used to be a woman's department store. Clothing.
Okay.
So it hadn't been occupied since the 60s. So it was a mess. And I went in there and I spent $350,000 renovating it. And it didn't work.
Oh, no.
It didn't work. We put in 50 pool tables. It was beautiful. But I didn't realize that everybody was coming down to Miami to get drunk and to meet girls and to hang out and have fun.
And be outside.
And be outside. and the pool hall was more of an indoor, cold weather type business. So I goofed.
Oh, no.
And not only did I goof in Miami, I opened one in Coconut Grove, too.
At the same time?
At the same time. On McFarland, right in front of Coco Walk.
Before
Coco Walk was even built.
Wow.
Yep. And I learned an expensive lesson because I opened up two pool halls and they both didn't work.
What made you open up 2 instead of just 1 and see how it
Because I
goes?
thought this was all working. It was just a pool hall. It wasn't a big expense. And I thought this was genius. So sometimes you're right and sometimes you're not right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was a lesson. And in the meantime, New York was still running and I was traveling back and forth. And I bought a beautiful home on Allison Island,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy because I paid under $1 million for it.
That's a deal.
And then last year it sold for $16,500,000.
Killer.
Yeah. So, it's just a lesson in like, hold on to your real estate.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But my son had left me. He was 7 and he went back with his mom up in Connecticut. So I was alone in a big house. So I didn't need to keep a big house. So I got rid of the house,
Mm-hmm.
which was a big mistake. But life goes on. And
So you were still running the business in New York and
I was still running
but living here full time and going back and forth?
Back and forth.
Why didn't you just stay in New York?
I found Miami to be my relief.
Okay.
It was like my exit plan.
Yeah.
To get away from New York because New York starts to consume you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're running in that business at that pace, you needed an outlet. And Miami was my outlet.
Okay.
So I got out of that. I got away from that restaurant. And after I left
wait, how did you get away from the restaurant if it was yours?
Well, I was partners in it, but the partners had decided that it wasn't profitable anymore. We weren't making enough money.
Okay.
So they said, why don't you leave and we'll take it over? I said, you got to be careful what you wish for. I said, this is really complicated. I said, it's not easy to run. It's not easy to staff and it's not easy to operate. So to me, it was an exit plan because the pool halls would be more profitable than the restaurant was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was planning on doing 12 pool halls all over the country. The ones in Miami didn't fail right away. We were operating for a good year or so.
Okay.
So I gave them the keys and left New York.
And again, you walked away with nothing?
I walked away. Well, I'd made a lot of money working there and running this restaurant for many years. So that was a big success. But then when they informed me that I had a chance to leave, I took it with both arms and jumped out and left. And it was a great relief to get away from the responsibility of running this thing. Very difficult. So I left it to them and they ran it into the ground in a matter of months. And it closed. And that was the end of Cafe Society.
How long did that go for?
No, they didn't last a few months.
No, I'm saying Cafe Society.
Oh, I was open for about 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had a nice little run there. But then they closed it down and that shut down. But I was already out of there and I was operating these pool halls. The pool halls weren't really...
Where else did you open up?
Well, I opened in New York, which I still owned.
Okay.
So that was still successful.
The one in the basement?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Below the restaurant was still mine.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had that and I had the one on Washington Avenue and the one on McFarland.
Uh-huh.
So I was operating those 3. But I got a little distracted. And I used to go to Joe's Stone Crab. And I would eat the stone crabs all the time. That was my great, escape when I'd fly in, I'd go right to Joe's and check my bag and go have my stone crabs. And then I'd go home and that was my fix. And I said, we ought to ship these stone crabs back to New York and all over the country. Everybody should be eating these stone crabs. They're delicious. So I sent a little story to a friend of mine at New York Magazine and she put it in New York Magazine. It was a little article about 2 inches. And it said, Shelly Abramowitz is back in action. He's selling stone crabs from Miami Beach. And the phone rang.
But you had no in to stone crabs at the time, other than just go buy them at Joe's.
I'd go to Joe's, but I was in the restaurant business, so I kind of knew how to do it.
Okay.
And I said, I could do this. I could sell stone crabs. I said, the phone started ringing. I had 100 orders the first week. So I
From
ran
that ad?
from that little
story, the
in New York
editorial.
Magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah, millions of people reading it in New York. So everybody wanted those stone crabs. And I said, I could do this. So I was in that house on Allison Island, and I bought a cooler and I filled it with ice, and I bought a bag of stone crabs, and I shipped them, and I made some sauce, and I shipped that with the stone crabs. A year later, we did $1 million out of the garage selling stone crabs.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the beginning of South Beach stone crabs. And one guy that I would bring the stone crabs to had a boat down the street from me. Well, he lived on Hibiscus Island. So I would bring him stone crabs, and he'd take them out on the boat, and everybody be eating stone crabs. He talked me into doing a restaurant. And he says, I got this space on Lincoln Road in the hallway. And he said, you could do South Beach stone crabs in the hallway. I said, okay, let me try that. So I opened up South Beach Stone Crabs on Lincoln Road, and it was a success overnight. We were the only little restaurant besides Joe's serving stone crabs on South Beach.
Oh, nice.
And it was nice because it was never a wait.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was seated. It was comfortable. We were out on the sidewalk. I filled it with celebrities and models and movie stars and all sorts of people. And it became an overnight hit.
Mm-hmm.
Problem was, stone crabs are only a seasonal business.
Right.
So after 7 months, I didn't have anything else to serve, so I would shut it down. And then I wanted to reopen it in October. And my landlord pulled a quick one on me, and he pulled the lease and threw me out of the space. So I moved down the street to another space, and we were next door to Tiramisu, and in between Tiramisu and Spree.
Yeah.
Where
is that tiramisu's not there anymore, right?
Not anymore.
But now that you mentioned that, I remember
Tiramisu is gone, but Spree's still there.
Yeah.
That's the pizzeria.
Yeah.
And I was their neighbor. I was sandwiched between the two, and we had a big success there. And while I was there, I met a guy from Las Vegas who owned the Venetian Hotel, and later he built the Palazzo Hotel.
Wow.
And then he built Singapore. And he built in Pennsylvania another casino. He owned Sands Casinos.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Okay, a guy named Sheldon Adelson. Turned out to be about the fourth wealthiest man in the world. And we became good friends because we were both Sheldons.
Mm.
He was Sheldon Adelson, I was Sheldon Abramowitz, and he hated the name Shelly, I hated the name Sheldon. So we had a common bond, and we became great friends. So I would travel back and forth working on a deal to open up in the Venetian Hotel. I was going to do South Beach stone crabs. And then I met my wife on Lincoln Road, your girlfriend, Heather.
That's right.
We were in love. So we were traveling back and forth to Vegas, back and forth, negotiating this deal. And she said to me one night, she said, if we open this restaurant in Las Vegas, we'd have to move here. I said, yeah. She says, I don't want to move here. I said, really? She said, no, I don't want to move here. So I said, well, that wouldn't work out very well. So we had just about gotten the deal done in Las Vegas. It was a 10,000-foot space right on Las Vegas Boulevard next to the Wynn in the new Palazzo. So we canceled that deal, and we opened up a real estate office downtown.
Miami.
In Miami, because we bought an apartment in Museum Park.
Mm-hmm.
10 Museum downtown. It was the only building downtown at the time. A friend of mine, Greg Coven, had built it, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So I bought one, and then another, and then another, and then it was 11 units, which was my method, because instead of doing the restaurant in Las Vegas, we both got our real estate licenses. I had had mine for many years. But Heather got hers, and we opened up Museum Park Realty.
Nice.
Yeah. And after a while, we had over 100 units at 10 Museum.
Wow.
Yeah, we were managing half the building.
Wow.
And we were making a nice living because we were doing renovations and doing interiors because I built restaurants so we could do floors and closets. And it was all fun because it was creative and I loved it. And that was fun. But we were brokers. So Heather's a broker and I was a broker. She made me become a broker. After she got pregnant with Ben, she quit and I had to go back to school and get my license. And it went on, and we were in real estate. And one day she said to me, she said, I don't think we're going to be able to pay the bills. We're not selling anything. And this was, about 2006.
During the recession?
Yep, exactly. And I said, I always liked shipping those stone crabs. I said, let me reopen the stone crab business online this time, because I'd never really executed a website properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I'm going to call it Fresh Stone Crabs, because that's what everybody really wants. They don't want what Joe sells, which is frozen stone crabs. They want fresh stone crabs. They want them right from the boat. And that's what I do. So we opened up Fresh Stone Crabs, and we started off with a simple little website. And then the pandemic hit, and the business went crazy. And we did over $1 million that year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then it grew even bigger than that. And this week, I'm just negotiating a deal where I'm buying out my supplier. So next year, I'll be bringing over 50,000 pounds from the Bahamas of fresh stone crabs. And we sell only the best restaurants in the world. I decided that if we were going to be in the stone crab business, we were going to be recession proof. So I sell to the best country clubs, and I sell to Milos, and I sell to Mila, and I sell to the most glamorous and best seafood restaurants in the world. And we do that in Las Vegas, we do it in New York, and we do it mostly in Miami. But I have a regular clientele now of over 3,000 regulars.
Wow.
Yeah, and we ship all over the country to all 50 states. We overnight. And season's over here in Florida in about 2 weeks. But in the Bahamas, I get an extra 30 days, so I'll have stone crabs for Mother's Day.
Nice.
Which is coming up in the middle of next month.
Mm-hmm.
And even better, the F1 race, the first week.
Yep.
That's a big week for me. All those people come in, and they all want stone crabs.
Yeah.
So, we finish off, we start in a fury, and we finish in a fury. So it's pretty fun. And what's really fun is it's a seasonal business, and then I'm done. So I get 5 or 6 months of vacation time.
That's sweet. So what are the months?
It runs from October 15th for me till the end of May.
Okay.
Yeah, every year. And then we get the whole summer off.
That's perfect.
It's wonderful. And that's our latest venture. And that's what we've been doing now for a number of years, since about 1.5 years before the pandemic. And then the pandemic actually blew my business up. So I was grateful for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those great stories.
So I have a couple questions. I was like, okay, let me not forget all these questions I had as you were talking, because I didn't want to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to the apartments from 10 Museum that you had?
We still have them.
Oh.
And we still run that business.
Okay.
The stone crab thing, when I started it, fresh stone crabs, it was my hobby.
Right.
And now it's blown up into become a huge business for me, because I'm a wholesale and retail. We're completely vertical.
Okay.
We buy directly from the boats. We process the crabs, and we wholesale to all the majors. Mm-hmm. So we sell to the biggest people in the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the real estate now is my hobby.
Oh, okay.
But we still have 50 units at 10 Museum.
Yeah.
And real estate right now is at a lull, like a big lull.
Yeah.
Nobody's buying at 8% and 9%.
Mm-hmm.
The banks aren't really being very cooperative with mortgages, so nobody's buying anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just funny timing. And it's what I try to teach people is that having multiple streams of income, or having the ability, to have multiple streams of income is very valuable today.
Yeah.
I mean, I got lectured many times for not focusing, and people would say, stop jumping from business to business to business. Pick what you love and make it great, or have multiple streams of income.
Right.
And having options, because I've got enough energy right now to be able to handle what I'm doing But then you've got to like make a plan and be able to make these things work.
Yeah.
Because next year when I take over my Bahamas business, it'll get complicated.
Of course.
So I'll probably need a couple of employees. Right now I'm running with none. And that's the real secret of success.
So you deliver to everyone?
I deliver
yourself?
to everybody. People come and pick up from me. I try to accommodate all my neighbors, but we get it done. We get it done because you can if you want to.
Yeah.
And then the idea is to maintain as small a business and as profitable a business, and don't execute something to be the biggest shot, because sometimes the biggest shot is not the solution. The answer is do it within yourself. You got to feel it, and sometimes that dream doesn't have to be the biggest dream. You could do really well with something small and tight, especially if your family's involved.
It's true.
Yep.
That's true. I mean, you start off, I don't know, in college, I feel like for me, everything was like, think really big, but it's so big, it seems so far that you almost get paralyzed. You don't even want to start it,
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly.
It's overwhelming.
So who mentored you?
I learned as I went. There wasn't anyone I'd really give credit to for mentoring me. I mean, I watched my dad, who I give a lot of credit for, because I went to work for him. And then the tailor across the street offered me $5 more an hour. So I quit on my father and went to work across the street because he was paying me more. And my dad congratulated me on making a smart decision.
Nice.
Yeah. But it was my grandfather who I used to visit when he lived at the Cardoza. And I said, Grandpa, this place is like a dump, he said. And he'd say it was like Hollywood. He said, at the time when I moved in here, Shelly, he said, Betty Davis was next door and Clark Gable was across the hall. I said, wow. I said, it was like Hollywood. He says, yep, it was like Hollywood. And I said, well, now it's a dump, because this was the 70s. And there he was playing cards with his friends. But I said, Grandpa, how did you make $1 million back in the 40s? Because when he came over by boat. They left Kiev. He was a soldier in the Russian army.
Oh, wow.
Pre-World War I. This is 1913, 1914.
Wow.
So he grabbed my grandma, who was like his fourth cousin.
They're all cousins.
They're all cousins. He went to London, and they got on a steamship. And when I took Ben to Ellis Island, they have a great room with computers now. And you could punch in Harry Abramowitz, and the sheet comes out. And there was the whole story of how my grandfather came through Ellis Island.
Wow.
So he was one of those million people that, emigrated to the U.S. from Kiev, from Ukraine, of all places.
Yeah.
But it was a great story. And I said, Grandpa, how did you make $1 million back in the 40s? He said, $1 at a time. And that was the truth, because he was selling used clothes on Hester Street when he came off that boat, and grew it into a big clothing business.
Yeah, I guess it's just little by little. And when in the process, you don't have to know the answers when you start out, right? You just have to start, figure it out as you go, and you start meeting connections, and you just start evolving, right?
Do what you love, and do something that gets you up in the morning.
Yeah.
Because if you're not excited in the morning, you're going to go to work and you're going to hate it. You got to have an emotional connection to it.
Yeah.
You got to feel it and enjoy it. More important than the money is the love of what you're doing. And then that's something that you got to do. I can't do what I'm doing if it wasn't for the people that I was meeting. It doesn't matter if you're in sales, it doesn't matter what you sell, but it's the people that you touch. And I had a call this morning that one of my favorite customers, this guy is a little bit older than me, and he's retired, and he drives up in this fabulous Mercedes every time he comes to visit me, and he picks up some stone crabs. He wants the biggest and the best ones, and I call him whenever I get a fresh delivery, and he would come over every week, and he got into an accident 30 days ago. His wife just called me.
Oh, man.
And it's just a terrible story, but it just shows you touch people. and and she had to call me to tell me that he was recuperating in the hospital because he got into a motorcycle accident.
Gosh.
Yeah, terrible. But it's just those things that, your business and your life, and it just makes everything, it tells you what's really important.
Yeah.
And so she'll be over tomorrow, and and the stone crabs are my treat.
Oh, that's sweet.
No, of course. But
That's sweet.
it's just you get attached to your friends and your customers, and it's an important part of the whole thing is the relationships you create.
100%.
Yeah.
I have clients that'll tell me stories. I mean, that I become very invested in their lives, right? And so when they call me years later, or I'll call them and I tell them, oh, you remember back then, your daughter, or back then when you used to work here, or you told me that, you and your husband like this or whatever. They're like, how do you remember that? And I was like, to me, you were like an extended family.
Right.
You get so, invested in the relationship, and then that to them makes them feel like they mattered to me, which
That's
they
right.
did.
Of course.
And that's what keeps those referrals coming, and
That's
those
right.
relationships keep growing,
Absolutely. 100%.
So thank you, Shelly. That was an amazing story. I feel like I got for the first time like a full flow, like a good flow without the 20 side stories.
And there's hundreds of stories in the middle of the stories, but it's funny when you sit down and you try to think about it and get organized. But no, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, let me see if you answered all the questions. I guess one. I'll ask you one, and that's it. What would you say is your secret to success?
And there is no real secret. It's not a secret. It's just like I said. You got to do something that you enjoy doing. You can't do it just for the money. You got to have your heart in it.
Got it.
Otherwise, you're never going to succeed at it. Everything that I've done, it's all driven. And maybe you get a little disenchanted or a little bored with it, and then you make that move, but then you make a new plan.
Yeah.
You got to make a new plan, and you got to think it through. And I try to advise people now, and I do that for a lot of friends, but you got to put it down and make a plan and write it all down, and then look at it. And if you can convince yourself that it's going to work, then you do. You make it happen, and you'd be amazed what you can do.
Convince yourself that it's going to work. I like that.
That's right.
Thanks, Shelly.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.